Welcome everybody to episode 86 of the Gecko Pod. We are a podcast for the gecko community where we talk about the hobby of breeding geckos. We talk about the business aspect of breeding geckos. AJ and I deep dive into weird nuances of the gecko hobby that nobody else cares about except for really nerdy gecko people. So when we have friends that watch these episodes, AJ, nobody knows what the heck we're talking about.
I know people be like, "Oh, I like the one where and they'll pick someone where it's like nothing interesting, super interesting was talked about."
Yeah.
Oh, I like when you guys pull up the beef and cheddars. That was my favorite
part. which makes it a truly niche hobby that we're a part of. Nobody knows what we're talking about.
But the people that do know, they know what's up. So
yeah, they know what's up.
Yeah.
The few people that we're here for the hardcore nerds of the hobby. So
yeah. If that can be our contribution, then so be it. That's awesome.
Yeah. My name is Harry at Zero's Geckos. AJD Reptiles, co-hosting. We're in 2.5 years now. Hi, AJ.
I don't know, man. Time just goes by. I'm just here for the ride.
I'm here for the ride, just enjoying it. It is at this point for this year, and maybe probably a little bit last year too. Like our episodes aren't as routine. It's a little bit more sporadic because of whatever busyness and whatever it may be. But I think we're okay with that, right?
Yeah, and I think especially, what people are going to see, like I think between this episode and the part 2s, part 3, part 4s, whatever of this episode, the Dawn episode, the Rapashi episode, the ones we've done kind of in recent, I would hope that it's seen that the amount of work going into each episode is increasing. So while maybe we'd be doing less episodes, I feel like our amount of preparation for them is higher a lot.
Yeah.
And the amount of work, like say this diet episode we're talking about now, the amount of work that you will see is going to go into this in part 2, part 3, part 4 is immense. Work and money being devoted to this topic.
Yeah.
So
so we're talking about diet and deep diving into it. And maybe today we kind of have a bit of an overview, right, AJ? Kind of how did we land here? Like, why are we even talking about this? Why is it important? Are there issues with the food? And then what are some resolutions? So basically, what's the problem? What are we doing to resolve it, right? And not necessarily a problem, but like things that we can improve.
Why are we even talking about it?
Right. So I agree that the amount of work, I'm just basically echoing what you said. Like we talk about this diet thing almost every day. It's insane. Like you're just doing a lot of work on your end, and we're just kind of talking through some of the issues, and we see a lot of diets come out recently and within the last season or two. And I think for me personally, even when we had we've always had chats about diet, whether it's like question of the week on the Discord or, we've had these various conversations from the pod, but now for me, it's like even more important. For me, it was really a jump off from the Alan Rapashi episode, which really got me thinking even more so. And for you've been thinking about this for like years now, AJ, right? Like we've talked about this in past episodes where you tinkered with the idea of, creating your own food, and you did, right? You made your own food in the past, you fed it, you kind of did research. And it seems like even now you're going even deeper into research to get it down to the very details of, the little levels of whatever nutrients and what goes into the diet. And I think that it's very exciting for me to see.
And and we'll get into this up on this episode today, but even down to, and I don't want to, spoil this too much, but even kind of going down the path of, is the way that we've done things is because we'll get here, but the framework of like what we talked about with Alan Rapashi, the framework of this first diet that he made, he admits it was trial and error. He had the framework of like working off of poultry and other kind of like omnivore species that gave him a baseline. But to a point, it was trial and error. And then Pangea was kind of just, Pangea's version of Rapashi's diet. It wasn't a reinvention of the wheel in any serious way. And then all of these diets that come out, if you look at crude analysis, they all go off the archetype of Rapashi.
Yeah. So everyone's just kind of. Do we know of any diet company that has legitimately built from the ground up, not with what was already being done with Rapashi and all these other diets, like straight up? Or
I would say maybe BPZ took a turn away from of what was out there, but I don't think they did it successfully. And I don't know, looking at the ingredient breakdown, I don't think it's probably like, hate to say, I don't think anybody feeds BPZ like without mixing it into other diets. Like, I don't think it's actually a viable standalone diet. So,
and then with the aerotonic stuff, I know you mix, like, is it yogurt or something into it?
Yeah, it's like kefir, fruit.
So is that something completely different than the, kind of the foundation of what Rapashi has done as well?
I would say that's definitely a different thing, but I would almost liken aerotonic Ariel's diet to the way people did things before Rapashi existed.
Okay.
In a lot of ways. Back in the day, that's what we did. It was like you were using things out of your kitchen. And you were using yogurt, you were using baby food, you were using chicken baby food, you were using, calcium supplements that you could buy, over the counter and stuff like that. So it was, I think that the aerotonic thing gives me more of like the vibe of kind of like old school mentality of a little bit more of a kind of a grassroots human food kind of thing. So
okay, got it.
But other than that, there really hasn't been, huge question. The question of why has not been asked, in my opinion, enough in general, as far as why we feed what we feed. And clearly, and we'll get into this too, but clearly there's nothing, you can't say that Alan's diet, obviously, you have to say that it has revolutionized and made it so that we could produce these animals at scale, that it brought these animals to the mainstream, 100% of that. That without Alan's diet, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. We wouldn't have this podcast. We wouldn't be breeding these animals to the same level that we are. So that has to be said 100%.
Yeah. So, what led us to where we're at? What do you think, AJ, from your perspective, is kind of the spike? So maybe, is it the pod and us talking about it that has spiked more conversation about it, or has it already been ongoing before we talked about it?
Well, I think that it's constantly been, I've been in the hobby. This year is now 20 years for me as a hobbyist and a breeder in the Crested Gecko space. And I think that diet has been a topic of conversation. Clearly, in any space where you're feeding animals, diet is always going to be a main topic of conversation. So it was 20 years ago. It is now, as far as to what food's the best. What should I add to my food? What do you feed yours? How, and everybody, you included, like, you add a little banana, so-and-so adds a little honey, so-and-so adds a little yogurt, so-and-so does this, that, the other thing. And why are we doing that?
Yeah.
Why are we doing that? Is it because we feel like there's things missing? Is it because we feel like something isn't right,
Right. And, and I have to admit, before talking to you at this depth of, the kind of the nutrition facts, I was going off of what a lot of the hobby said, a lot of what the community said, learning from other breeders, and, they said this feeds well, this works well. And so to be clear, like, for my last 3 seasons, I fed, and I've said this before, I fed Pangea, fig and insect, like almost solely. That mixed with some growth and breeder. And so there is a lot of merit in terms of you can grow animals just feeding that. But I would always add a little bit of bee pollen, a little bit of honey. I threw in some extra calcium, and then after talking to Alan and then his episode and then talking to you, I'm like, why do we do these things, and what is actually nutritious? And then you've already been thinking about this for a long time. What makes a complete diet, right? What does that even mean? Because we've seen, AJ, like that. You and I were talking earlier. We've seen when we're talking about a complete diet, some people, and when I got into the hobby, the pet store person said, you can feed this Repashy. He gave me Pineapple Express Repashy. You don't need to feed crickets. Just feed this thing. Right? And I had this little baby that never grew. Right? It grew like so slow. And that makes me think, like, what does complete diet actually mean? Does it mean it's going to keep it alive? Yes. But is it actually helping it to grow at a pace that's normal?
Yeah.
And,
so I think for me, obviously now from my standpoint, and I think from a lot of people that probably listen to this standpoint,
yeah,
the way I'm thinking about food is not, does it work? Is this actually the best thing to do? Because a lot of things could work. I used to breed geckos with baby food. It worked. Yeah. If you fed a ton of bugs and you mixed enough calcium into your baby food, it worked. I produced geckos. The geckos lived. It worked. Does that mean it was right? No. And so I think the pod has definitely helped a lot. Obviously, I told you I formulated a diet in 2020, like 2020, late 2020, early 2021, fed it for a couple years exclusively. And I think through that, a lot of the thought process, and even further since now being full-time doing this, having the podcast, I've questioned, and you can look back on 86 episodes of the podcast, you'll find tons of clips of me asking guests like Alan or John DeBoer, any of these different people, when people went to New Caledonia in June, when we talked to June, or all these different people, it's like, when you went to New Caledonia, what did you see? What insects did you see? What fruit did you see? What were temperatures? Like actually getting real snapshots of what these animals have, evolved to over all of this time to thrive on.
Yeah.
And I'm just really not convinced, and we'll talk about this. I'm really not convinced that maybe the current thing that we're doing is ideal. I'm not going to say it doesn't work, but I'm not sure it's ideal.
Yeah. And so when you talk about that, are we just talking about like growth rates? Are we talking about
I think it's
health of
multifold.
geckos? Say that again.
I think it's multifold. And so we'll talk about this. So we'll say what have been some of the things that have triggered. Why don't you talk about the growth? Why don't you talk about the growth rate first?
The growth rate?
Yeah. Talk about your experience with that. Because as a buyer, you have obviously experience with that.
Yeah.
And people can probably resonate with this idea.
So for me, what I've learned from my now 4 seasons of breeding is that, yes, I fed Pangea, fig and insect, mixed it in with growth and breeder. But what I've supplemented it with is crickets, live crickets. And I attribute my growth primarily to the crickets. Kind of filling it out, kind of giving them kind of that balance of, live cricket protein. The diet itself, the proper fats. The diet itself, I feel like you can't just feed it exclusively without the crickets and have the geckos grow at a quote unquote proper pace, and we've seen that. I've seen that in terms of some of the animals I've purchased, actually several. And, you look at the date of, a lot of things were after the fact for me. I'm like, oh, that's a nice animal. I'll buy it, 12 grams. And it's like a year and a half, and I go back to the breeder. I'm like, well, do you feed crickets? And some of the breeders would say like they don't feed crickets regularly. And it's not a hate on how they do things. It's more of a question of like, oh, okay, so if I'm getting a small gecko that's over a year old that's supposed to be mature enough to breed, and it's small, what does that say about feeding the complete diet to them?
Yeah, is the diet complete if the animals are essentially, I mean, I'm not going to say they're stunted, but they're not growing at a rate that is, I would say, normal.
Right. I mean, so
and we'll never know. I mean, we don't know what, air quotes, I will play devil's advocate, we don't know what normal in the wild is.
That's true. I mean, because you can see some of these wild animals and they're like kind of all
like
small.
They look terrible.
They
look terrible. So I mean,
so what maybe what we're doing is injecting all these unnecessary things. Again, just playing both sides.
But we're also coming at this from the perspectives of, we are gecko breeders.
Yes.
And so things that are important to us, and I think are important to the people that listen to this podcast, is what we would view as like a steady, healthy growth rate, good production, good health of your breeders. Things like that are important to us. So whether the animals, I mean, I think trying to say that this is going to be completely wild, consistent diet is not my ideal, because that might not be, I mean, who knows? The environment that they live in now could have been altered over time from storms, climate change, all these different things. So the environment they're living in now actually might not be ideal.
Yeah. I mean, I bet in the wild they don't eat very much.
No, I mean, they're all skinny.
Yeah, they probably go weeks without eating,
They're all skinny and their heads are caved in and they look like they're on death's door. So
yeah, so what we deem as normal or healthy is kind of subjective as well, right?
But I think breeders, what could be said is, okay, let's say this. Okay, you and I both know you can take a gecko and feed it only diet, and it takes 3 years to grow.
To breed,
You can
to be adult size.
Yeah. You can take a gecko and feed it crickets every day and feed it diet, and you could probably get it to adult weight in like 8 months.
Yeah, that's true.
But both of those, I would say, are
extremes,
on the extremes of what is probably, so you can see the extreme on one end and the extreme on the other end. And so my goal, I think your goal, is like to be in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, I agree.
As far as, so like for me, I'm looking at like 16 to 18 months is kind of what I'm looking at for growth rate.
Yeah.
Where I'd like size.
Yeah.
For it, maybe not full size, but maybe like filled out to breed, females a little older, just from a reproductive standpoint. But so I think what triggered a lot of this is that we saw where there's a lot of animals being sold in the hobby that aren't being fed insects, and they're growing at terrible rates, very slow rates. A year and a half old, and they're the weight of a gecko that eats crickets and is 3 months old.
Yeah. So
that's one piece.
Like I got an animal 2 weeks ago, and again, this is not a shade towards the breeder at all. Like, nothing at all. But I got a gecko, and it was born September of 2023, and that's basically a year and a half, right? The thing is 24 grams, and it's like so skinny. And so I don't know. And I realized kind of the setup was that they probably didn't feed crickets, and in terms of the food rotation, I don't know how often they fed the diet, but thing is alive and it's healthy. It's just it's just really, it looks very undergrown and kind of dinky and whatnot. So I don't know. Like when we talk about the diet itself and a complete diet, AJ, like, are you thinking of it needs to have more certain protein so that they grow properly, or is there some sort of like, yes, to the diet, but also supplementation of live crickets, which I feel like is something that we will always say yes to.
Yes.
But is there something in the diet that we can improve on so that it plays well with the live crickets as well? And, in case some people don't feed as many crickets.
I mean, I think that that's an ongoing conversation for sure. And that needs to be determined. I will say that, I mean, it's very possible that there needs to, and we've talked about this too, it's very possible that there may need to be two diets or a split of a juvenile diet and an adult diet.
And what would those contain? Different proteins?
Different macronutrients for sure. And some micronutrients. I mean, you might see a higher calcium need in breeding animals, breeding females especially. But you might see higher protein, you might see higher fat in a juvenile based diet because they're using a lot of calories to convert to growth, and they're using a lot of protein to convert to growth. So those diets might need to look different, and that's not like I'm not speaking this from like it has to be this way.
Right. Just kind of an observation, possibly.
Yeah, observation. I just think when we take all animals and we put them in one bucket and we say this food is correct for every animal and every life phase, I think that's probably I don't know what the correct word for it. Maybe ignorant. I don't know.
Yeah, but so my question to ask of you then is, we've been doing that, like all these seasons
with insects.
With insects, yeah.
We're doing it now, where we're feeding. You and I are feeding crickets 2 times a week.
Yes.
To our juveniles, but when our adults hit adulthood, they're not getting crickets 2 times a week. Yeah, because they don't eat them.
They don't. Yeah, they eat the crickets a lot less. Some don't even eat the crickets. Live crickets. Yeah.
So what is different about like a juvenile will eat as many crickets as you'll give them.
Yeah.
And when they hit adulthood, they don't. So clearly there is, difference in those things. So just things to think about. And then, talking about adult geckos. So we talked about juveniles where we see lack of growth rate when fed the diet exclusively.
Yeah.
And then when we get to adult geckos, we see geckos becoming morbidly obese when they eat the diet exclusively.
Yes.
So that's a whole nother piece.
Yeah.
And when you get animals that are morbidly obese, production goes down. Egg production on some of those females just dry up completely. They just don't lay at all, or they lay 1 egg, or they take whole seasons and don't lay at all, like 0 eggs at all.
So is that the obesity are those two things directly related to each other? If they're like overly,
is it one of those things? Is it coincidence, or is it correlation?
Yeah.
I think it's linked. I think that pretty much it's general consensus in the hobby. If you have animals that are overweight. Seems if you get animals that are like severely overweight, they don't produce well. Like I remember I've bought some animals where I'll just give like an example animal. Like I buy an animal, it's 70 grams or 75 grams, female, and I buy it. And the person tells me, she doesn't lay very well. She lays like 2 eggs a season. I go, oh, okay. And then I put her on a diet and I give her to like 50 grams and she'll lay 10 eggs a season. But that's just an example of, to me, it's like, how often do you see people in Facebook groups and stuff too, where it's like, man, they post a picture of their gecko and they're like, I'm trying to get my gecko to lose weight. I only feed it once a week and it won't even lose weight. The things are just, they're so heavy. And you see geckos where they get gout in their joints and
right.
like all this stuff. I'm like, why do our geckos look like they have diabetes and they're morbidly obese?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's from feeding. A lot of these geckos are eating once a week.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, and people are saying, oh, I'm putting my gecko in at 18, 24, It's got all this room to exercise. I feed it once a week. I can't get the thing to lose weight. And to me, then you have to look at diet.
Yeah.
That's the only variable at that point. I mean, and if temps are right, if the environment is right,
yeah,
if everything else is right, you have to look at diet.
I mean, but the cutting out a feeding should help that. I mean, that's like you're cutting out some of the calories.
It should, but I mean, ask people's experience though, because what ends up happening is they lower the feeding frequency, but the animals just gorge themselves on the one meal.
So maybe it's the sugar content. Is there more than that?
That's to be determined. Okay. I mean, what you'd have to do is you'd have to put animals on different diets and see what actually, I mean, it's not necessarily sugar. It could be caloric, you know, it could be caloric density, how many calories they're actually intaking in a single feeding.
Yeah.
Because it could be that like, oh, you give them, say, you know, 3/4 of an ounce of food and they eat the whole thing. Well, they just ate 120 calories worth of diet, you know, or whatever it is. Make a, you know, 90 calories worth of diet. Well, maybe that's at the weekly intake where they're not going to lose weight.
Yeah.
So we don't know that. It's all, you know, this is all information that
still trying to figure out.
We're still collecting, you know.
Yeah. You know, things that we've seen in the hobby, whether it's good or bad. So, I mean, you're a huge proponent of feeding crickets. You always have been, live crickets. And I feel like a lot of people have, you know, caught on to that in the last, you know, few seasons, and which has helped a lot of that growth. But what are some other bad things that we've seen? You know, I don't know if bad's the right word, but what are some of the more, I don't know, bad or / negative things we've seen in terms of the diets that we've seen being fed, whether it's various, you know, we won't name all the brands, but various brands and how they've affected some of the geckos in terms of their health, in terms of whatever, right?
I mean, I think the biggest ones, like you're saying, slow growth rate on juveniles, obesity in adults, and then I think there's some pieces in the calcium absorption, a lot of animals calcium crashing. I think that could be related also to breeding animals too young, and so that could be related to it as well. So that's a hard one to say, oh, it's 100% just linked to diet, you know. But I think it's strange that there's so many people that are having, like you're talking about, people that are having to add calcium to their diet.
Right.
How many people are liquid calcium supplementing their animals? A lot. You know, every time a female lays eggs and they get a patchy egg, people are in there with the liquid calcium, you know, syringe and giving them calcium.
I mean, so maybe it's the lack of calcium either in the diet or just that they're not dusting their crickets enough or not feeding
crickets.
Not
feeding crickets that aren't dusted, you know?
I see.
Yeah. So all of those things are, and it's one of those things. It's so hard because I try to be, like, I used to work in the medical field and everything is data. Like you need data, and you can't make claims without data. And so all of these things we're looking for correlation, causation, and this is all just observation for the most part. But you know, I don't really know if you can get this information, but you would need so much time and so many examples of animals gathered from so many different people.
Right.
So it's one of those things where, yes, you could get this information if a bunch of different people participated and took perfect notes for 10 years, you know?
Yeah. I mean, Rapace and Pangea do have that history to kind of go off of. We don't know if they're intentionally hitting all the data points and like collecting all that data from users, but they do have that history.
But the problem is, and this is the hard part, is you can't you couldn't take the data from users because every user does things
mix
differently.
Yeah.
What ratio of water are they using? What do
Yeah.
they add into the food?
Yeah, a lot of people mix their diets. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some people might mix it 10, 15% thicker, which would throw the macros of the diet completely different.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting.
You can't really trust all that crowdsourced information as like legitimate statistical evidence.
Yeah. So related, but a slight pivot is when we had a Q&A not too long ago where you know there was some news about Pangea like possibly like causing
the growth and breeder stuff.
the growth and breeder, either animals to die or infertility, right? When it was something like some wild claims. And then even we had John kind of in the chats, and we kind of put his chats up, and we kind of put that to rest a little bit. But is there something like that can affect? Is there something in the diet that can affect those things? And to your knowledge, AJ, do we know what that is? Like, or is that just completely made up? Like,
No, I mean, you could theorize. I mean, you could make theories. You could say, oh, you could say, oh, the preservatives are too high. There's too many preservatives in diet, artificial preservatives. Oh, it could be, you could say it's the gums. Maybe it's the gums in the diet. You could theorize. You could go, it's any of these additives. Potentially, it's xanthan gum. It's it's preservatives. It's citric acid. It's any of these different things. So, but I think the thing that can definitely be like agreed upon is animals that get obese produce poorly. I mean, I think that everybody can pretty much agree on significantly overweight animals produce badly. So that's one that can be like pretty, no one's going to be like, oh, my geckos that are huge produce better than my ones that are like 50 grams or 55 grams.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever hear that in all these years. So that's one thing that we can probably kind of run with a little bit.
Yeah. But we just don't know. Like unless I feel like there's almost no way to prove
well
what those people are claiming about Pangea.
Oh, about Pangea now.
Yeah,
I don't think there is.
There's
because you would have to say, if like in that scenario, you would have to say, I only feed Pangea growth and breeding, and I've done it for a full season, and before that, I fed this other diet, and I only fed that diet, and those are the only two things I changed.
Yeah,
I didn't feed a single other diet. I never blended a banana into it. I never did anything. How would you ever? It's just so hard to make that claim. Variables.
Yeah, and I do think that some of those claims were hard to listen to because, like, so many of us have used growth and breeder for so long that I'm like,
had no problems,
no issues here, and so we're clear with that. There's no, there's nothing. Yeah, it just made me think of like, why would they make that claim?
Well, I mean, that's a discussion for another time. I mean, all you have to do is look at the people that made those claims and which Facebook groups they ran.
Yeah.
Who the admins in those groups were, and you can.
So one of the reasons why that prompted me to kind of not. So after the Allen episode, something that prompted me to kind of try different diets, and I haven't fed Fig and Insect since that Allen episode, which is the 1st of January, right? Like the first week. And it's nothing against Pangea. It's more the question of like, why do we feed what we feed? Yeah. Is it because the community says, "Oh, this is good"? Is it because on Amazon Pangea has like 2,000 reviews versus Rapashi that has 50 reviews? Like like people buy into things like that because the masses do it, and it makes me think like, why am I doing this, right? Like, does all this other stuff actually work? Rapashi, Vital Meal, and so I've been feeding all those things ever since. I've even tonight I mixed, I tried to mix some growth and breeder with some Rapashi. I'm trying different variations, but it just made me think like, is it marketing, right? Is it just the fact that we say something, the Gecko Pod says something, and then other people follow? So
yeah, or
so
a Facebook group says,
yeah, so
that this is good, this is bad.
right,
And
so
another thing that we need to talk about, and this might be in part 2, part 3,
yeah,
go into deeper, but what we start to, I think, have to dismantle is we have to dismantle that feeding response equals good.
right,
100%. Like you can't say that feeding response is not an important part of a diet, right?
It's just one factor.
It's one factor. So, but often when you see people review new diets, like other diets that have come out, I'm not going to name all we've already talked about Repashy and Pangea.
Yeah.
Other diets have come out, Blue River, Lugardi, Zumed's diet, whatever. All these diets come out. When people get them in for review, Vital Meal. What's the thing that is the number one way that people review a diet?
Yeah.
You see, every diet review goes one way. They put all the cups out on the cart and they fill all the cups up with the diet. And then the next scene in the reel is, look, this is the next day. Nothing ate it. This is a bad diet. And I think that is a very unfair judgment of a diet. Also, I think that's why people stay on certain diets, because when they try to feed another diet and they see feeding response worse, they assume that it's a bad diet.
Right.
Which is not good logic.
Yeah. So I for me, like, just on socials and stuff, it's easy to be like, oh, like, I posted about Pangea, I posted about Repashy, I posted about Vital Meal, and people buying and selling all this stuff on Palm. And for me, it's more like, let's learn together, like what feeds well. Let's try different things. So for me, it's not that I'm like this all of a sudden a Vital Meal fanboy. Like, do I think that it's a probably good diet? But yes, but also I'm still learning, right? Like I'm just starting to feed it. Even for Repashy, I just started to feed it a couple months ago, and so it's not so much of like, okay, I'm just all these guys and anti whatever. I'm more like, let's try everything and let's see why we feed what we feed and what is actually healthy. And this is why I like talking to you, AJ, is because you're not just, you kind of look beyond the brand, you look beyond the marketing, and you look at what is made up in this stuff, right? Like, so even right now, if you want to pull it up, some of the ingredients, we can look up what are in some of the ingredients, and what is the kind of the makeup of such and such food and this brand, and how about here, and what makes it different. And I think that's what we need to look at, right? We need to look at what it's composed of. And
I think that you have to start thinking about your animals like you think about the own food, the food you eat yourself.
Yeah.
And thinking about, and maybe this doesn't matter to people, but I know that for you and I are gecko breeders, right? And the thing that's important to us is our geckos' health and our geckos' fertility and their egg production and the average number of eggs that a female lays. All of those things are important to us. And I think that coming at diet, that's where my head's at now. Is I'm going to care about the back end, the health of the animal, the output of offspring. That is the measure of success. Health of the animal, growth of the animal, output of offspring. That is kind of like, as well as like long-term health of the animal. If the animal ends up morbidly obese and just a potato that can't move by 6 years old, that's not a good outcome. That's not good.
Do you think that can be figured out, meaning just by looking at the breakdown of a diet? So what I'm thinking of for a new breeder is like, hey, there's Vital Meal on the shelf, Repashy, Pangea, whatever, XYZ brand. How do I choose one? Can I just look at the makeup of what's in it and then see like, okay, it has this amount of protein, this amount of fat and fiber, this it cuts out some of the preservatives. Maybe this might be healthier for what you just said in terms of the health of production, the health of the gecko. Can we do that?
I think you could probably make some. Man, it's so hard. That's a really hard question. Because the reality is probably the average consumer, could they? Yeah. Yes. Will they probably have more error than not? Also probably yes. Because like you're saying, like if you look at the macros, of Repashy, Pangea, Vital, Lugardi, on paper, they're all the same. Now, plus or minus 10%, 5%, but then even within, and what people don't realize this is when you see crude analysis on a bag, right?
Yeah. I'm just going to pull up some.
So just show like a crude analysis.
Pulling up Vital right now.
Okay. Pull up a neutral third party so we don't get in trouble.
Hold on. What's hold on.
We have zero affiliation with Vital, by the way.
Vital does not pay us, by the way. I'm selling Vital not because they pay us, because we're just experimenting.
Okay, so go to Vital and look at their crude analysis. So if you look at the crude analysis right here.
Hold on. Let's go to a different one. Okay, let's go to insect because that's one.
That's all we have to see. I'm just showing them a scale. So if you look at the guaranteed analysis on this stuff, there's minimum. Like if you look at this on most of these things, this is guaranteed minimums. So there could be up to, so technically per the labels in the supplement industry, in the pet, even in the pet industry, this could be up to 20% higher than this. This is the minimum.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So this is minimum 20% protein. This could be 24% protein. For example, that's just one example here. That's because of variability in maybe in the batch, also in the source from the supplier.
Got it. Okay.
In the raw ingredients that the diet's made out of. So basically, they're giving you the minimums here. Yeah. So moral of the story, if you look at almost all these brands and you look at this breakdown right here, the crude breakdown, they're all going to line up very similar. So to answer your question, can somebody go and just look at this crude breakdown and decide is a diet good or bad? I would say no.
Got it. Okay.
Because there's diets that I would say are not good that have
similar breakdowns.
The same breakdown.
Yeah.
You could make, you could say, you could make a meal that is, you could take a McDonald's cheeseburger and then you could put it next to, a cup of rice, broccoli, and, grilled chicken. And if you have, you could get the macros to line up. It doesn't mean that it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's
the reality. I was trying to pull up.
Because then you start getting into details, and this is all. I keep saying this is all part 2, part 3, but it's like you get into things like amino acid profiles. You get into like where are they getting the fat in the diet? Are they getting it from egg? Are they getting it from insect? Are they getting, all of these different things are at play here. Are they getting their fat from coconut?
Yeah.
Are they getting their protein from soy? Are they getting it from whey? Are they getting it from casein? Are they getting it from, black soldier fly, cricket? All of these different factors play into things.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking at Pangea, crude protein. Yeah, kind of a similar guaranteed. Now this is the breakdown, right?
Yeah.
Just for the general consumer, then, since it's so similar, is it more than? Is this more so kind of word of mouth, or just how people have been doing it that we can know and trust the brand, or
I think at this point, until there's more data that's been evaluated, like third-party testing, and I'd encourage people. You can go out, you could buy Vital Meal, Pangea, Repashy, you could go out and test it. Go test it yourself. I mean, if you want to know something about it, you can send it in and test it. Go ahead. There's nothing that says you can't. I mean, especially if a brand isn't going to provide you with that testing, then go do it yourself. I don't know. I don't think you have to be in the dark if you don't want to be. If you want to know that information, there's no reason why you can't find it out. Especially if it's not being provided to you. If you ask a brand for their lab results on these things and they won't give them to you, then just go get it yourself.
I'm trying to look at the I wouldn't say the brand, but I was trying to pull something similar from another brand and it looks really crazy. So anyway.
So I think moral of the story, I think it's and nobody has to do what we're doing.
Of course, yeah.
But I think what we're doing is we're starting to look at diet as almost like go from we know what's out there now. Can we also go to square one and kind of evaluate maybe where there could be some holes? Does this mean that we need to do something different? You know, obviously I'm a little biased because I work on my own diets. But I think that just comes down to what our goal is. And at least my goal is healthy animals through all life phases, production, and just healthy animals in general that we don't have to constantly be like putting it on a diet or having to feed it more crickets because the diet's not propping up the animals correctly. So that's just kind of the direction that I'm trying to think about things in.
Yeah, I see part one. Part two we can dive a little bit deeper into kind of
ingredients.
Ingredients and the science of it. But I think for part one, I was thinking more of like don't just believe something because we said it or because the community says it. Actually do some of your own research. Look at the ingredient pack. Think of why you feed a certain thing.
Have some independent thought for sure.
Yeah, I think so. Like if we're not a good source for you, don't listen to us. Like we're never one to be like, oh, like it's, those guys suck. It's only this, like, no, listen to everybody, see what works best and kind of do your own research. I think that's the best way to approach it. And so when we talk about diet, we are not the source. We are a source that hopefully helps people understand that there's more to it than just because it feeds, like you said, because the response is good.
Geckos clean the bowls. It's a good diet.
Well,
you could just fill the bowl with honey. You could fill the bowl with honey. They'd clean it too.
I mean, that is tough though, to be honest. Like because people aren't food scientists. We don't really ultimately know.
Totally. Like, that puts the responsibility on the people making the food.
Yes. For them to educate at least. Yeah.
For them to educate and to have transparency.
Yeah. That one's tough, man. Like, I'm going to be honest. I feel like transparency is very hard.
Well,
you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of people are shrouded in like confusion when it comes to the food and the diet.
And it's not the greatest marketing. I mean, in part, I feel like it is actually modern food marketing is transparency.
Yeah.
I think that people want to know what's in what they eat and why it's there. Like the current trend in general is when I look at the back of this box or the back of this bag, like when I buy a loaf of bread, I don't want there to be 100 ingredients in it. I want there to be 5 ingredients in it.
Yeah.
Okay. It should be flour, salt, water.
Yeah.
And I mean, people don't want to see 100 different things in a piece of bread.
I think it's interesting. And, maybe we'll talk about this in part 2, AJ, but, like sometimes I look at the back of an ingredient bag and I'm like, why does it need like 20 different ingredients? And it seems like things are put there to balance out other things, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, like, what do we do? What is going on? What is going on here?
So this is here. So we have to put this here to counteract this.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And then, with all these additives and all these like unnatural things put in there, like how does it affect our geckos? Again, fertility issues, obesity issues, lifespan.
And back even like when we talk about, we can talk about this because it was, it's obviously public record with Alan's episode, but we talk about how when he first made the diet, he put very minimal preservatives in the diet.
Yeah.
And his thought was, well, it's fruit. It's not supposed to be, it's not supposed to
go bad
like
after a day or two.
A fruit smoothie is not supposed to stay in the cage for 3 days.
Yeah.
Even probably 12 hours if you're being honest with yourself. And that was kind of something that was being pushed on him and then, asked of Pangea when they were selling Repashy was that they wanted the diet to last longer.
Right.
But in ways, I mean, you have to push back on that and say, this isn't about what you want. We're trying to be good stewards of the animals in which are entrusted in our care. And maybe that's not the best thing for the animals. Maybe you have to suck it up that you have to take the food cup out tomorrow and you can't leave it in for 3 days. So those are some of those questions where I feel like now in the hobby, we're getting to the point where I think before it was, I don't know. I just think now we're getting to the point where we have a lot more knowledge available to us and we're able to ask these questions of why, which to me is exciting.
Yeah. I think it's always good to, for me, it's always very important to educate people on a level where they make their own decisions, right? Sure. It's not just us telling you this. It's not just Pangea telling you this. It's not just Repashy telling you this. It's like, okay, like try to understand yourself. Like where does this thing work? How does the machine work? When you know how the machine works, you're going to make such better educated guesses, educated decisions. And I think it'll be very helpful for you as a breeder.
I mean, even look at this, like we talk about it all the time. Look at how much the shipping industry has been unraveled.
Oh my gosh.
The shipping industry is turned upside down.
Yeah.
In the last 3 months.
Yeah.
6 months, 3, 4, 5 months. Absolutely turned upside down on what people thought was possible in pricing, how things worked, kind of what the ins and outs of shipping were, as far as how a company has to run. And nobody ever questioned that until something changed,
something blew up.
Right? Yeah, until something kind of was pushed and there was a little bit of a crack to peek into.
I mean, honestly, I don't think anyone could have really done anything.
What do you mean?
Like nobody in general, people don't have the power. You can like not support a company, but there's only like 4 or 5 shipping companies. You gotta buy those. You gotta buy your labels.
Sure. I get it for sure. I'm just saying that I think that now people are like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Like I had no idea that this was even possible or that like things could be different. Right.
Yeah.
Like you and I talk about all the time. It's like, man, it's so crazy that like we used to do this for shipping or do that or what, it's like, and now we're doing this.
Right.
Well, now I like, that's kind of how diet is shifting for me, where it's like, maybe there is another way to do this.
Yeah.
Maybe at least for me personally, I'm not saying everybody has to do this, but just my own personal experience is like, I don't think that it has to be that like the current status quo is the only way that we do things.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's kind of just where I'm at, but excited. I mean, just every day, I'm talking to you, I'm talking to Gabby, I'm talking to, talking to people and, talking to Andrew Gilpin. And I'm like, man, there's just like, there's so much information to learn, to uncover, to understand about nutrition, about animal science, about all of these different things. It's a bottomless hole of information and studies and data and things to learn.
That's what makes it so fun too, is that, in the hobby, it's not stale. There's always something we can uncover. and we can improve on, whether it's the shipping, whether it's the food, whether it's the husbandry and the care, or how we keep them, things we keep them in. There's always better ways to do it, and I think that's this is why I'm excited for sharing stuff on the pod, is because like it allows people to think like, how can we do this better? How can we do this hobby better? Don't just listen to this company because they're big. Like think of how you can do things better, and let's do that together. So I love learning together. I love educating each other on these things. Yeah. And to me, that makes it really makes the hobby really exciting. And you and I talk about this, AJ, on the outside of this, in our private chats, we're always like, man, all this crazy stuff is kind of unraveling, and so it helps us to kind of learn more and do things different, and it makes it very exciting when we think about what we can do.
I think the hobby is hitting a point where, I mean, you even see that, like, you see things in care changing. You see like the primary caging of like how many people credit Robbie for like Robbie showed everybody those container store tubs.
Container servants.
And now I'll 100% give him the credit on this. Robbie. And now literally everybody uses that tub.
Just call them the Robbie.
It's probably 90% of adult caging that's bought right now.
Yeah.
In the Crested Gecko hobby is that tub. I swear every person, that's all they buy.
Yeah, the PVC tanks are kind of
PVC's like on the downturn. I would say it's like glass Exoterras, and then like the container store tub.
Yeah. Too heavy, and it's like $150 for this thing, brand new. Like who's gonna pay $150 like when you have dozens of geckos, it's just so expensive. So anyway.
But that's just an example of like 3 years ago, nobody used that tub.
Yeah. So I do like that, there's a bit of evolution in terms of everything we're doing, and we're seeing things on the ground now in terms of how it improves, or maybe not improves, depending on how you see the thing, in terms of our care, in terms of production, in terms of how the animals do. Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that, not everybody is going to dig down to this level, because, there may be more of a pet status, and that's totally okay. But yeah, as breeders, right, this is a podcast for breeders, for breeding geckos. Like we're trying to figure out how best to be efficient and maximize kind of our systems and outputs, and not just for the sake of mass producing, like people are sometimes.
But, I mean, the way I think about it is a healthy gecko is a productive gecko.
Yeah.
The best. I mean, when you think about, I'm trying to think of a good example. I had one in my mind, but I lost it. But moral of the story, like, I truly believe that the philosophy that if you want to have a successful gecko breeding operation, your animals have to be healthy.
Yeah.
They have to be doing well.
Yeah. And diet is a major factor in kind of how that plays out.
Sure. So, diet, hydration, temperature. I mean, people are keeping geckos probably 10 degrees warmer than they used to. A lot of people kept their geckos 68 degrees.
Which is crazy.
I
mean, some people still do, right?
Some people do. But I mean, just talking about how many changes just in care have taken place in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah. It's massive.
Yeah, so. It'll be interesting. I mean, because like every kind of stage of the hobby, you think that you're doing the best, which of course everyone's gonna try to do their best. Like I don't think anyone's gonna try to do worse, but there's just so many improvements like constantly, and it's almost like, oh, what's next, and
that's the exciting part for sure.
And for at least for me now, and you've kind of pulled at the string before, is now the diet. So this is why we're doing this episode, is that I'm excited that you're kind of working on a few things yourself, and
who knows? I mean, sure, I'd love to sell a diet eventually. If nothing else, if I can understand what I'm feeding to my own animals, and that's all that comes from everything that I'm doing, then I've considered that a win.
Yeah.
That if that's all that comes of all the research and the money and the testing and the development, is that I feel like I can
feed your collection,
do my animals right, do by my animals right, then I consider that like a total victory. So
yeah, I mean, that's exciting. I'm excited to kind of learn more about the details that you've learned and the ingredients, and eventually if you have stuff that you're working on for your collection, I would love to kind of dig in a little bit and learn from you on that as well. So, and obviously educate people on the podcast. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just excited about, I mean, just like food aside, I just feel like there's a renaissance of being open-minded about things. And I hope that we've had some thing to do with that. I think that even just watching like your Palm Street lives and different things, I see so many questions that are really good questions. And like not just like, I mean, we do get these questions where it's like, Harry, which is the worst diet? It's like, you're not going to answer that,
bro.
It's like, but a question like
people. No.
But a question more like, hey, do you think like it's better to feed a diet that's heavier in insect content or not? It's like, oh, well, that's a good question.
Or how does that cricket feed from vital meal, which is like 47% protein, like, I think that's questions like that, like, are more general in terms of like, it's those are good questions, because it's like, I mean, have you fed a diet like that to,
I mean,
to a gecko?
I think we have, though. I mean, when you talk about how some people, even you, Harry, like, how many of your diets did you take diet and then blend a ton of crickets into it?
Yeah.
Because all your crickets that you used to buy all showed up dead all the time.
From an unknown brand.
An unknown brand that Harry's never talked about. The crickets would always show up dead. But then that meant that you had fresh dead crickets that you could blend into diets, and you were blending a lot of crickets into diet.
Because they showed up dead every single time. So.
Yeah, and how did that go?
It's great.
Yeah, so it's interesting. All these things are pieces to the puzzle that we're all kind of putting pieces into, or the thread that we're unraveling.
Yeah, and we can save a lot of the stuff for part 2, and so we'll close soon. But how much of what we're doing? Oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought.
Save this for part 2. How much of what we're doing is what?
I was just hung up on the brand, and so hung up talking about this.
About the crickets?
It wasn't about that though. But how much of what we're doing? So before, what intimidated me was that there's so many variables and factors to kind of the health of the gecko and the fertility of the gecko, and doing what's best for the gecko, that it seemed to me like, oh, that's something I can't touch. But after talking to you and diving, as you kind of do your research and you're working on your own stuff in terms of deep diving into how to make something as complete as possible, it helps me to see that there's hope. That, okay, maybe we can know certain things that we didn't know before. So
just like the shipping, maybe there can be a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, and people can understand.
So you don't know what you don't know. And that part is very difficult to find out until people tell you. And so as you kind of do your research and you share some information with me, I'm like, wow, like maybe we can figure this like food thing out. So it's not just like, oh, everyone feeds Pangea, so let's just feed Pangea. Like, I feel like there's more to it than that. And that makes it very exciting for me. So just wanted to say that piece.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Anything else? I mean, I'm sure this is going to elicit a lot of questions.
Yeah. If you have questions, put them in the chats, in the YouTube chats. And I think we'll use those questions for part 2 as you kind of dive deeper a little bit. And even for me, I'm not a food scientist. I don't know very much about the food. I fall in line with everybody, just be like, oh, everyone feeds Pangea, let me just feed Pangea. You know, like that is me. You know,
I'm not
so,
a food scientist either.
yeah, but your work,
I'll say
your
that.
work. We'll just say that your work with what you're doing is actually it feels, you know, it seems very, very helpful.
And I'm not, and I'll be the first one to say it. I'm working with people that are very qualified. So, you know, very qualified people that are helping me along the way. I'm, you know, Rapashi did this, Pangea did this. You work with people that are animal nutritionists, food scientists, people with PhDs in these subjects, right?
Yeah.
And so all I can do is ask questions and seek to understand.
Yeah. So I appreciate that you're willing to like chat about it on the pod and kind of help us to glean some of that wisdom and insight. And I think that hopefully the community will benefit from these things. And again, like Gecko Pod, AJI are not the only source, but we hope to
for sure not
stir a lot of conversation so we can all kind of learn together. So yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. Any other thing?
No, I mean, I think it's just, I don't know. It's just exciting. Like, I'm excited about this. I'm excited about I'm still stoked about just like changes in shipping stuff, changing in how we sell animals, changing in how we, cage animals, all these different things. Any of these little, even when I figured out I remember 10 years ago when Andrew Gilpin told me, oh, put all your cups in this bag and put them in the washing machine. That still has been one of the most helpful things that anybody's ever shared with me in this hobby is like how to wash a ton of cups easily, And, or
people ask me a lot about the incubator thing. And I learned that from Ryan Iris. And I've been sharing that information, in terms of the link, to help incubate at certain temps, so little things like we help each other. I love that. I love that we can help each other learn about, the little small nuances of the hobby that nobody else cares about but us.
Well, the biggest thing that you've probably learned from me, I would say, out of everything, is how to rip an egg carton in half. That's probably
bro, like probably a lot of new breeders don't know, so maybe you gotta resurface that video of yours.
Yeah, we can post it to the Gecko Pod story in case you missed it. Here you
go. Another one of the things that you taught me was kind of the crickets in the bag, the Ziploc bag. It's game changer. That's how you feed. Before I was like cussing, trying to put them in cups, and they're all like jumping out, all jumping out.
I was telling. Side note, little tangent. I had friends here, and they saw me feeding crickets with the bag, and they're like, "Why do you do it with the bag?" And I realized in that moment, even that, and I said this on my poem, I think the other night, did I realize that based on the size of the cricket and how many I want to grab, I actually know like how many fingers and like the feel, even the feel, like what does 5 3/4 inch feel like in your hand?
What? That is craziest thing. Because when you told me that back when you told me about the bag thing, now I've done it so much that I can feel exactly 4 crickets, depending, it doesn't matter what size. I'll be like, oh, there's 4. Oh, there's 5 in my hand. I don't have to look. I'll just throw it in and there's 5. So you do it so much that
you do it so many times that you know what it feels like. Yeah.
You feel all their antennae.
It's like when people cook the steaks and they're like, okay, closed hand, open hand, here.
That's a great skill to have. Just grab crickets and go, oh, I have 5 in my hands.
Talk about an absolutely useless skill outside of this hobby. Hey, you guys want to know? You want to see a cool party trick? I can tell you how many crickets are in my fingers right now.
So that's so funny. That it seems that excites me, but it's like so useless. Anywhere else,
it's so useless, but it's just, it shows how much we love what we do. That we have so many repetitions into these things.
It saves so much time. You literally don't have to like pick them out. You just grab it and you throw. It's so.
Well, that's the problem when you use a cup. It's like, how many are going to fall out? 3 or 12.
I stopped. I tried that cup thing a couple times. I'm like, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. Like, you got to use the Ziploc bag.
And there might be a better thing than a Ziploc bag, but to me, it works pretty good.
Right now, it works. If somebody has a better idea of how to do it, you should let us
I'm
know.
totally open to
Comments,
using something else.
YouTube comments, let us know.
We use the gallon Ziploc bags, and then I put them in
Yeah.
a shoebox on my cart so it doesn't tip over.
Yeah. I'm just carrying it the whole time with my other hand.
That's nice. That's nice.
Oh man, cool.
Any other questions you have, Harry, about diet stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of questions about diet, but I think more of the detailed stuff we can save for part 2, because I do think
Cool.
that that one should be a good one in terms of the sources of protein. That I think that was helpful for me. Plant protein versus insect protein. I think those things are more exciting for me to talk about in the next.
And episode. I will end on this.
Yeah.
I think now thinking about this, I don't want anyone to take this episode as like big diet brands bad.
Yeah.
Us or anyone else working on a little thing good. That's not my point at all.
Yeah.
I think I would encourage the big brands as well to think about things from the perspective of why do we do what we do? Because I mean, I think there is some shortcomings in our commercial diets.
Yeah.
I will say that.
I mean,
I think that people see that for sure, and it's why these things are talked about all the time.
So. I agree. I mean, so there's no hate against big brands. Repashy and Pangea are mixed in here, so it's all we still use it, but we're still trying to figure out, are there better ways that we can do things? And I think that's a legitimate question to have, even for, like you said, the big brands, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they've been working on it so long that they feel like they got it dialed exactly, and who knows? Maybe
if there's no major complaints, then why change?
Yeah. But anyway, we're here to kind of dig at that and poke and prod and ask more questions, and I think that's exciting. So
hopefully we all come out on the other side better for it. So
yes. So
yeah,
awesome, right. Cool. We'll close it out, and then next week you have Tinley, AJ.
Tinley.
So we probably can record next week.
So if anybody's at Tinley, come by, hang out, say hi.
Yeah,
I'll be there.
We're recording on a Friday evening. I'm gonna try to get this one out by tomorrow, which is Saturday.
Cool.
And then next week we'll break, since you have a pretty big week with Tinley.
And then I'll be back, and then we'll hammer it again.
Yeah, we'll have part 2 post Tinley. So
cool.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, AJ. I'll catch you guys later. Appreciate you all. Again, any questions you guys have about diets, or even your experience with what you do, things that work well for you, feel free to throw them in the comments. Like and subscribe. You can find me and AJ on Palm Tree, Instagram, all the good stuff. It'll be in the credits after this. So awesome. Cool. Appreciate you all. Thank you, AJ, for everything.
Thanks, man.
See y'all. Bye.